Hey everyone, welcome back to the Inn with Dr. Tim. And super excited to be back with you after a long hiatus. A variety of things have happened. So we've been gone. We've rebranded our company, Physician Therapy Institute. It still exists, and we're still teaching courses and moving mostly online. However, we've rebranded the clinic side of the business into elevated performance rehabilitation, so more comprehensive, full service clinic. And that's where I'm speaking from today and sharing this amazing talk with you today and many more as we're getting back on the train of doing more podcasts for the Inn with Dr. Tim, a podcast to improve your health and performance. And so we're bringing you topics, cutting edge researchers, as well as clinicians to discuss how we can help you achieve your goals and elevate your life to its fullest potential. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us with the Inn with Dr. Tim. So we are super fortunate today to have Dr. Will Adams with us. We're going to try to tackle and really kind of get into hydration to improve your health and performance, specifically to give you some hacks and based on the research that we have available currently that will both probably surprise you, possibly get you to drink a lot more water and some other beverages, and hopefully to get you to also avoid some injury, illness, disease, as well as improve your performance for life and sport and the challenges it provides. So I have Dr. Will Adams here with us. Thank you, Dr. Adams, for being with us. He's the president of Adams Sports Medicine Consulting. Dr. Adams has a very robust research history as well as professional history, and I'll let him give you a little bit of background about that. He's been either lead or co-author on 115 publications and peer-reviewed scientific journals, books, so forth. He's a heavy hitter. And so thank you, Dr. Adams, for being here today. We sure appreciate it. And maybe just give our folks a feel for what you do and where you've been and why you've dedicated really your profession and life to some of this hydration research.
Yeah, no. Well, first and foremost, thanks, Tim, for inviting me to be on this podcast. It's super exciting to get the invitation to join, but two, to talk about one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's not every day I get to talk about hydration in my normal day to day, so it's always a good opportunity when there is the opportunity to do so. I guess quick background, I do have a consulting company where I work with athletes and sport organizations and teams and industry partners to advance different things within the field of science and medicine, particularly within my content area of expertise, which is one, hydration, which is why I'm here, but then also in the thermal physiology realm. So that's kind of a brief overview about myself, but I guess some additional background in my training. I do have training in athletic training. So I worked clinically for a number of years at the high school and collegiate setting, and as well as at mass participation events such as Boston Marathon, Falmouth Road Race, and whatnot. Had the opportunity to be able to treat a number of patients suffering from exertional heat stroke and everything. Clinically, I have I guess, quite a diverse experience clinically, working with across settings and different populations. And then I guess my professional history, after graduate school and a postdoc, I was on faculty at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro for 4 years. I was the program director for their MSAT program. And then I had my research lab there where I focused most of that time in and around topics related to hydration. And really looking at more long-term health outcomes, where prior during my graduate studies, it was more acute outcomes, performance outcomes. So kind of shifted a little bit. And then in the last 3 years, I've overseen a research program at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee in our Department of Sports Medicine, where our focus is a broad focus on injury and illness prevention. So doing a bunch of work in that field, looking specifically at topics related to women's health, para-athlete health, pediatric health, and mental health. So I have a great team I get to go to work with every day there to hopefully answer impactful questions that helps not only Team USA, but helps the much larger population of athletes participating. That's a little bit of a background myself there. So,
Well, and with that, I guess we should say for myself too, but owning a few businesses and yourself being involved in multiple organizations, the opinions we share today are really our own. They're not really representative of any of the organizations we work for, but we do hope that some of them will benefit those that we work with and those they serve. Well, the interesting thing about hydration, Dr. Adams, that I've run across is like it's so abused. And I think that, if we can move individuals, I think, to the concept of how important it really is really critical. It became really important to me when I started to develop kidney stones, right? And I'm like, there is something wrong here. And after reading some of the recent research, and particularly a paper by Perrier, where he talks about this shift from this focus on performance, because as a former, athlete myself, maybe I'm still there as well. I was always like, oh, I got to drink for, like my cycling or performance or, mountaineering. And I was focused there, right? And I had this kind of thing, and maybe it was because of all the sports drinks and the electrolytes and so forth that were coming out at the time. And I never really kind of thought about, well, my hydration actually needs to be in my life, like all the time, not necessarily just for athletics and performance. And I think that's where Carrie is kind of really driving us is like, it's really important for performance. There's no doubt about it. But it's maybe equally, if not more important in our daily lives, particularly let's talk about post-COVID. We realized with COVID, metabolic health was a big factor in whether or not or how well you did with the COVID infection, right? Or, and as we've come to understand and appreciate, it's really important for a lot of things, hydration. And so I'm just curious, like from your perspective, why is it you think we as individuals, just human beings, so abuse probably one of the most critical aspects of our metabolic health and performance, be it water or what we're ingesting? I'm having a hard time getting my head wrapped around that. Like, we know it's really critical, but we abuse it all the time. For example, maybe this thing is not my best hydration beverage this morning. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's the great comments, and I think and I would agree in that. I think that as humans, as people, I don't think we really recognize the importance or really fully recognize the importance of hydration, right? You're like, oh yeah, drink water, it's good for you and all that. But really, the long term or potential long term implications of not consuming adequate amounts of fluid, in this case, water, could be detrimental or potentially detrimental based on the literature. And I think, probably it's partly due to a couple of things. One, just not being fully aware of the true importance of water. Now, if you think of it, right, and usually when I give a talk on this, one of my first slides is, and I make a statement, water is the most essential nutrient to sustain life. But if you just use the word nutrient, your mind probably goes to carbohydrates and fats and proteins, things with density, energy density. But water, there's no calories in water, right? It's really no taste. You're not getting any benefits. So when you say nutrient, a lot of times people don't think of water as a nutrient, although that up to 70% of our bodies are made up of water. And if we go without water for a matter of just a few days, 3, 4, 5 days, really bad things can happen to us. But if you think of it,
you could die.
Yeah, but if you think of it in a way where, okay, well, if I go without water for 3 to 5 days, I can die, but I can go without carbohydrates and fats and really food for like months, right?
Right.
And it's fine as long as I consume water. So I think it's just that perception of what water is, and it is a nutrient, but the perception that it's not, right? And I think you'd even go back and looking at, the dietary recommendations. So you go back to look at the old food pyramid. Now it's 9 plate. If you look at those recommendations as far as what you should be consuming daily in your diet, water is not included in any of that, right? Dating back to the 50s when they first created the food pyramid and now 9 plate. And even today, they suggest dairy, but water is not included in your daily intake recommendations from even the government, the federal government, right? Now, within the latest dietary recommendations that have come out, water is mentioned, and it's really more of, we really still need to better understand the true health benefits of water, which I agree.
So maybe we can bring some awareness to folks. What I'm hearing is probably water is our most essential nutrient for life, for performance, but we don't treat it that way. Maybe because individuals really don't understand how it can impact you. Okay. So as I mentioned before, I had a little problem with kidney stones. And even I'd say in the last couple of years, I've had one attack. Previous ones were pretty, intense. And so I didn't realize I was a low water intake kind of individual. I thought, well, hey, I'm drinking water when I exercise, but in reality, I didn't necessarily like water. Like it wasn't something that I reached for throughout the day to hydrate myself. It was something else, right? But I realized most recently reading that Perrier article that it was placing me at huge risk for not only kidney stones, but chronic kidney disease. Okay. And so what was really interesting about that article was that it mentioned that those who are low water intake individuals, okay, the way our body regulates, our sort of drive for thirst and water is that it actually creates us into anti-diuretic individuals, meaning that we just like let go of less water. So our bodies are like trying to hold on to that water. So therefore we're not like wanting as much. And little did I know that I was like concentrating, all my stuff and creating like stones in my body and potentially causing myself chronic kidney disease. So there was a real wake up call for me to be like, hey, I need to be consistent in my water intake. And then some of that is some of the emerging research on the metabolic health thing was that well, it might actually be affecting my heart. It could be affecting, because water impacts, I guess, like what you said, our entire body. And so being a low water take individual, it might make me fat too. Because I guess there's some emerging research on like if we don't have enough water, we release more cortisol, we're under stress. I guess we're under like metabolic stress or cellular stress. Can you comment a little on that? Because I know that, working some of those events that you have, I'm sorry, the Boston Marathon and so forth, man, those people are under stress. But I think metabolically, like daily, if we don't have enough water, we're under stress, but maybe not to that extent. Can you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think, yeah, and I think going back to the previous comment, and which then feeds right into here, I think the literature in and around the long-term health implications of not consuming enough water, that's really still emerging. Like we're still learning more and more
Mm.
about this. And I think to your question, I think back to a talk that I heard Dr. Ivan Tak. He's a researcher and professor in France, given a few years ago. The purpose or the point of his talk was to really highlight the evidence at that time, the existing evidence,
Hmm.
EVP or arginine vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. It's the same molecule, two different names, suggesting that AVP was in fact a stress hormone. Because you think of stress hormone, we're like, okay, cortisol, right?
Right.
But interestingly enough, AVP and the secretion of AVP actually independently secretes cortisol outside of the normal cortisol pathways in the brain. So if we're thinking about, okay, well, I'm not consuming enough water. My body needs water to function, right? My
Hmm.
cells need water. Everything needs water. So if I don't consume enough water, then my body needs to adapt to that stress to conserve water, which in this case is releasing AVP to then reabsorb water from the kidneys. And then there's other downstream effects of that hormone systemically. But if I have an increase of AVP and then AVP independently secretes cortisol,
Hmm.
well, there's a pretty good relationship there that, well, my body's under stress because my body needs to adapt to what I'm undergoing, in this case, not consuming enough fluid, right?
Right.
So now thinking of some of the other effects on AVP throughout the body, there are effects systemically, like I mentioned, but, one of those being, increase secretion of insulin, which can in fact
Right.
lead to insulin resistance. And there's some good literature to suggest that there is an association between underhydration and insulin resistance and a decrease in insulin sensitivity. That in of itself is like, wow, that's
Right.
pretty important, right? So
Well, I wonder with that because this connection that appears to be emerging between the ADP, the antidiuretic hormone, vasopressin, correct? Is it?
Mhm.
Okay. That it may be leading us into type 2 diabetes. I know there's no like definitive there, but there's some hypothesis that because they've done some studies, as I recall, with type 2 diabetes individuals. One, they show that they have very low water intake. Two, that there's a massive rise or their dysregulation and this sort of release of ADP and their insulin and so forth. So I always heard way back when, like, hey, just drink more water and you'll be more fuller, and so you won't eat as much. And I guess that makes sense, right? Because you're filling our stomach. But I never made the connection that water is actually regulating potentially my hormones, which is limiting my fat accumulation as well as how much I'm holding on to, right? And so I think that's super exciting in some ways because, as we all know, we're under pretty much the next pandemic, which is obesity. By I think the estimates on the last podcast, talked to Dr. Barney, and she said by the year 2030, we're estimated to be 70 total population in the United States is going to be 75% obese, which is like crazy, right? Alarming. And then, we look at like how much are really people drinking? And I asked this to a couple of my patients the other day. I'm like, so, like, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? Like, what do you drink? And so some of the answers were quite terrifying. Here in Utah is it's very much a sugar state. We love our sugar, and obviously most around the world and here in the United States, there's just these kinds of drinks that have some sugar in them. But we actually have sugar beverage like chains here. And so this morning, going down the street, I stopped. I can't say the name of the place, but there's a drive-through, and there's a line like a half mile long, with people with their gallon jugs like sticking out the window, and that is like their first drink of the morning. They're getting a highly carbonated, sugarified drink for the kids and the entire family. So I'm wondering, Dr. Adams, if our maybe society or culture has changed a little bit to where the focus on the hydration in the morning, the water, and so forth has been sort of supplanted, with sort of this new thing about, you need a coffee, you need a sugarized drink, you need a Monster, you need that to get going in the morning. So how do we combat that? Because as you saw this morning, or what did I start with this morning? Bad habit, right? I start with a tea, has lots of sugar in it. So how do we go about combating that?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 billion question. Thinking this morning myself, I got up, I went to my favorite coffee shop here in town
Mm-hmm.
and had a nice latte, and yeah, it was delicious, right? But thinking of like what is driving that, and really when it comes down to it, we're thinking about what's driving those behaviors. And again, I don't know if there's a good answer because there are so many things in our environment and society that really impact our behaviors.
Right.
So it's a matter of is it because there are industries that are doing a really good job of marketing their products
Mm-hmm.
to the consumers? Probably. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They're doing a great job because they're
Mm-hmm.
selling. But how
Right.
can we really address the larger issue, which I think is going to take massive change? Because not only is there economic influence, right? But there's social influence, there's cultural influences, there's influences all around us that I think we need to
Sure.
learn better understand those interactions and really how to approach a solution where we could promote health in a way that's going to be, or at least increase the appetite for health among individuals.
The appetite for hydration.
Yeah.
Right. And so, our sponsor today of the podcast, we'll talk a little more about them later. They advocate, sort of supplementing or, sort of providing another behavior in relation to our hydration. And so maybe someday we'll see hydration stops right next to the Starbucks that have flavored water and things of that nature. Let's talk about this sort of chronic strain, I think, that we're putting ourselves under subconsciously and maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally. We know that it'd be ideal, right, for us to change that behavior to maybe start the day not with a coffee, with a latte, with a chai tea or whatever it might be, but to maybe start with something else, starting with another type of beverage. Because my question to you is how detrimental is that really? I mean, I'm just curious because we know that a large majority of the population is not waking up and drinking water in the morning, right? Or something that is advantageous for them to drink. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, from a research perspective, you know, how impactful was that? Like how detrimental, how maybe not helpful, um, is that practice, that behavior?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think my mind going to more than just waking up is the throughout the day. At least with the information, the data we have here in the United States, primarily coming from the NHANES data sets, the massive longitudinal study that's been going on for a very long time.
What study is that again?
The NHANES study.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And there's been a number of papers published using the NHANES data set to look at really hydration and other outcomes. Um, and it's interesting because if you're looking at just behaviors, right, fluid intake, based on the NHANES data set, 40% of men are meeting daily recommendations for fluid intake or really water intake, and only 60% of women are. So, we have data to suggest that we're not consuming enough fluid. And there was another recent paper where the looked at some similar outcomes, and those rates were even lower.
Mm.
And they broke it down by life stages. I can't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but those percentages are quite low for people meeting daily fluid intake recommendations. I think to think of more of the long-term implications, and I know we've chatted quite a bit. There's a relatively recent study by Dr. Jody Stuckey who looked at older adults, 51 to 70 years of age, and they looked at whether or not these individuals met daily fluid intake recommendations, and then they looked at outcomes. One was those who were not meeting daily fluid intake recommendations were more likely to die earlier in life than those who did. So that was probably the biggest take home. And I think that time frame, if I remember correctly, was 5 to 7 years earlier.
Mm.
So that's pretty big. But then looking at some other health outcomes that they also looked at, and looking at the odds of obesity and insulin resistance and other comorbidities that we have, those odds are 1.5 to two times greater for those not meeting daily intake recommendations of water.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's all based on data that's already been collected and retrospective analysis there. So, but that's starting to paint a bigger picture. Like, hey, this is something we should probably start paying more attention to.
Yeah.
Where if you just drink more water, you're potentially less likely to have obesity or insulin resistance or metabolic disease or live longer. So yeah.
Well, with that, I mean, everyone probably wants to find out and know, like, is it just water? Because there's, if you kind of observing, I guess, media culture, right? There's lots of calls to say, hey, put some electrolytes in your water, right? And it just seems to be, from my observation over the last several years, that there's just this huge emphasis right now. I mean, it always has been like, get your electrolytes through your different energy product, you can pick your brand. But now there seems to be this sort of, I guess, drive or focus on daily supplementation with electrolytes. And it got me thinking the other day, why is that the case? I mean, I know that there's been some studies and our sponsor, Elite, electrolytes today, they sent me a great study on smoke jumpers about firefighters. It was a study out of I believe University of Montana, and they found that hey, if smoke jumpers, they had one group just taking water, and then they had one group taking these electrolytes with their water. The ones with the electrolytes had way less thermal strain indicators, heat illness, things of that nature. So I think, there's I guess maybe a theoretical jump there that if we had electrolytes, proper electrolytes, magnesium, sodium, chloride, and all those, that potassium, we'd be less likely, be more hydrated, I guess. So then it kind of sparked the question in my mind, like, well, what is it about our daily food consumption, our daily like water consumption that where we might be missing electrolytes? For example, that just our general food supply doesn't have as many minerals in it anymore, the soil, or is it behavior, like what we're talking about? Well, instead of me having, this in the morning, I'm having a latte in the morning, right? Or even throughout the day, right? And then here in Utah, there's a lot of individuals who really like soda, So I have some individuals that are drinking it's crazy, up to almost a gallon of soda a day, right? And that's their hydration source for the most part. So what do you think that's about? Like, why is it potentially helpful, I guess, if these studies really are, indicating that electrolytes are good for us? Why is that the case? And then second, these other factors, you know, why is it that we need them? I guess, is it we're deficient?
Yeah, no, I'm going to jump around a little bit to address that point, and hopefully it all kind of loops back and makes sense at the end. And I think if we're thinking about our typical Western diet, and if we're thinking about what we're consuming, we typically are meeting those recommendations, right? And if anything, we're over consuming electrolytes such as sodium, right? And that's going to be our
Okay.
primary driver to help with fluid shift is sodium. So in the Western diet, we're most likely consuming way more than enough in our diet, right? So then it goes back to ask the question, what do we need to supplement our hydration beverages with electrolytes? And I think the answer is it depends. Going back to your the study you mentioned, thinking of the job that you're doing, the environments that they're in, the stress that they're under, physically, regulatory, etc. That demand's quite high, right? So if I'm going to be in a situation where it's hot, or I'm exposed to a hot environment, and or I'm required to wear heavy protective clothing because of my exposure to the environment that I'm in, well, I'm going to be sweating more because my body needs to thermoregulate, right? Well,
Hmm.
in that sweat, I'm going to lose electrolytes because you're going to, right? So in that instance, supplementing your hydration with electrolytes is going to be beneficial, or in this case, it won't be harmful, right?
Hmm.
Now, whether or not that's going to have any additive effect of increasing the fluid retention, I think that might be a different debate just based on our plasma osmolality, or the concentration of the solute in primarily sodium in our blood versus what's in a hydration beverage, for example. And if that's going to be effective in being absorbed into our body, there's some debates there physiologically, right?
Hmm.
But it won't be harmful. And if anything, with some of these prolonged events, whether it be, our wildland firefighters, or, if you're, say, a tennis athlete and you have like a 4-hour tennis match in the Australian Open, where it's typically been, well, at least number of years, been extremely hot, having those carbohydrate electrolyte beverages, it won't be harmful. And if anything, it might be a little bit helpful, particularly in my mind around the carbohydrate piece, right? The energy that's also in those beverages to help sustain that physical work. It kind of depends, right? And it depends on the environment. It depends on the duration of which you're exposed to that, the level of intensity you may be working, like think of physical activity or actual work, where, if you are exposed to hot environments, and if you are exposed to that for a duration of greater than 75 minutes, and or you're undergoing, say, very strenuous physical activity, it probably will be helpful to supplement water with those carbohydrate electrolyte beverages. Now, if I'm just sitting in my office here, if I'm just doing work all day, yeah, no, my food that I'm consuming, that's enough electrolytes there, and I
Okay,
can just drink water, right? So
sure.
I think it really depends, and I think oftentimes, I think this goes back to a much larger issue in general. I think as scientists, we don't oftentimes do the best job of translating our science and our evidence and the results from our research into the populations that need to have it right. So
Hmm.
this study may be a perfect example, right? These are the results, but does it apply to the general population? Well, maybe, maybe not.
Right.
But I think as scientists, I think we can do a better job. We can always do a better job of making sure that the information is getting disseminated to the people that need to see, to have it. But the methods and modes of dissemination and what's being disseminated is going to be applicable to the target populations that you're trying to reach. So I think that a bigger thing of, and that may come back later on throughout the other talk, because I think there may be some misconceptions based on current literature, previous literature,
Hmm.
or other sources of information that may cause people to think one thing or one way versus another, et cetera. So that's my kind of long answer to really kind of go back and emphasize it really depends.
Well, I would agree with you. I think, we kind of, there's all kinds of factors, I think, that are some are modifiable and some are not, meaning we can change some and some we can't change, right? Um, like you're a smoke jumper. That's something you're not going to change, right? You're a desk jockey. You can change that a little bit, I guess, throughout the day based on your activity profile. But we necessarily can't change how our body necessarily processes nutrient of water, other nutrients. And what I found really interesting in some of that research that came out of the Perrier paper was that on kidney stones, they found actually when they compared the different types of drinks, although I didn't pick up that they just looked at electrolytes, um, that just ingestion of just plain water was the most impactful. They don't know why yet, right? They don't know why. If it was just like easier for the kidneys to process or what it might have been. But that was like one of the predicting things about whether or not you're going to have kidney stones again is how much actual like pure water that you were drinking. So maybe there's a mix, like which I think I'm hearing from you, like based on the circumstances you're under, you might need more. You
Mhm.
might need some electrolytes. And so, but it kind of depends on these factors. It depends on thermal strain. And so if you don't mind, I just wanted to show everyone like this is a really cool graphic that came out of the Pierre and others study in 2021, where they were really looking mostly at exercise. Um, and so this concept of strain, I can blow this up a little bit for everybody. So I understand that the majority of your research, uh, Dr. Adams, was in this sort of exertional heat illness stroke piece. But as we see in this chart under here, and I think this is what you're implying is based on, are you under some kind of stress? Are you under kind of some kind of heat stress? And there's all these mitigating factors. Are you hydrated? Are you acclimated? Well, what I found really interesting about sort of the schematic that they present, there's all these factors, right? And what's interesting is it's not just are you under heat stress, but all the other sort of things that sometimes we don't think about. Are you hydrated? Are you on, do you have much fluid at all? But where does it all lead us? It leads us to this idea of strain and a systemic strain. There's a thermal strain on our body, a cellular strain. And this kind of makes sense, right? Based on what we've talked about with sort of these metabolics that's affecting our cardiovascular system. It's affecting our peripheral metabolics. It's affecting our central nervous system. It's going to affect our performance, but it also, when we talk about performance being athletic, but maybe our daily life performance as well, right? But it might risk us and put us into exertional heat, sort of things such as cramps and heat illness and hopefully not heat stroke, right? Because, as we know, when we have heat stroke, things don't always go well. And so I'll get out of here for a second, but this is the other chart from the Perrier paper, where, as you can see, what goes in, okay, it's plain water intake. We got total fluid intake. What happens internally? There's that ADP thing that you were talking about earlier, but look where it ends us: kidney, cardiometabolic risk. And I don't think, anyone necessarily wants those things to be happening to them. You know, not only do they not want chronic illness, they they don't want to be heavy. They don't want type 2 diabetes, and they also don't want to affect their performance or potentially get heat stroke and not make it, right? So, considering those, let's give, if you can, you talked about translating the science, right? And I think that's maybe one of the roadblocks, right? Because I saw recently on one of your Twitter feeds, this free sweat calculator. I was like, that is awesome, right? And then I went into it with the mindset, I'm going to go in there and just find out, like, is it, normal Joe? I'm just going to use this to figure out how much water I should take in based on how much I'm sweating. And I was instantly like overwhelmed with the science, like is asking me all kinds of questions that I was like, it's very science based. I realize it's a research study, but I guess it comes down to like, how much should we be taking in? I think people want some kind of a metric. I know it's not, I know it changes based on these activities we're in, but can we just give some folks some general guidelines to help them? Maybe we start with life and then then we go with performance. I mean, would you agree with that? Like,
Yeah,
let's boil it down and make it simple for people. Let's give them some like concrete strategies.
yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And I think framing it, and your last comment was I really appreciated it. Thinking about like life and performance, right? And I think this goes back, and I neglected to mention this in the opening kind of statement. Is thinking, at least in a lot of the work that I've done, looking at athletic performance. And if we just look at athletic performance or health and safety in general, I think oftentimes people think of them as separate things when really you could probably make the argument that they're the one and the same. But really, if you think about it, right, health is a spectrum, right? You're either healthy or unhealthy. Like that's throughout life. We're healthy or unhealthy in performance, and we can define performance however we want to define it, right? It could be athletic performance, it could be performance in your occupational job if you're outdoors, right? Your performance is a metric, is just a tick mark on the spectrum of health. Now, there's the things that we can do and intervene on that can change the variability of that performance tick mark. But it all goes back to, where does that tick mark align on that health spectrum? And if someone's not healthy, yeah, we could probably do things to modify their performance, but it's only going to be bound to where they are physically as a healthy individual, or the health of that person, that individual. To move on to the question, right? So thinking about, okay, well, how much do we need to be consuming fluid wise? Well, we can look at two different bodies of recommendations. We have recommendations that are European. So the European Food Safety Authority has recommendations on daily fluid intake. That is really based off of more of a theoretical approach, in addition to some large cohort studies that were also conducted around that same time as far as what's adequate. Then we have the Institutes of Medicine here in the US that's very similar, or the approach is rather similar as far as a theoretical approach as far as how much should we be consuming. And there's actually a really interesting review paper by Dr. Larry Armstrong, I believe, that was published in either 2018 or 2019, where he actually breaks it down. There's a table that breaks down how much fluid should I be consuming at different life stages, like infants and children and adolescents and adults during pregnancy and etc. And there's recommendations based on the different kind of bodies that provide recommendations. So if we're looking at, let's just say adults, that's just easier. And I know those numbers off the top of my head. If we're looking at men, that's going to be somewhere in the realm of 2.5 to 3.7 liters per day of water.
So how I just happen to, I don't have just my latte here today. I have my Nalgene.
Mm-hmm.
So I carry this thing around. This is a liter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I might need to drink 4 of these, you're saying, a day.
Yeah,
Roughly 3.7, right?
yeah, and some of the differences there, the US based recommendations also account for water that's in food, right? Where the European standards are just looking at water, which is probably what's really driving a lot of the differences in numbers.
Okay.
if you're looking at between 2.5 and 3.5 liters per day, knowing that there's going to be some individual variability there as well, you're probably going to be in a good spot. And based on some of the literature that's been done primarily in Europe, looking at fluid intake and various outcomes, such as the one there's been a couple studies looking at kidney stones as far as the formation recurrence and supplementing water in those with recurrent kidney stones. People who are above or at or a little above that daily intake recommendations, there's good outcomes. So for men, that's that. Now for women, it's a little bit lower, primarily because of anthropometrics, right? They're typically smaller. Body surface area is typically smaller. Fat mass is typically higher than men, but that's that's physiologically normal, right? Because of things, right? So if we're looking at men, between 2.5 and 3.7 liters per day, depending on which standard you're abiding by. For women, it's between 2 liters and 2.7 liters per day. So a little bit lower. Still, you're looking at, you should be consuming above 2 liters of water a day to meet daily recommendations and to hopefully set yourself off on the right foot from a health perspective. Now, that has nothing to do with exercise, right? Whether it be sport or just going out for your typical exercise regimen to maintain health that way. Or say your job, you're physically active. Now that's going to add an extra layer of things there. So,
Right.
go ahead.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but so you're saying in essence, right? If I drink 2 of these a day, if I was a female, I'm probably going to be okay just for normal function. For male, probably 3 to 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Normal function. But then I add in, like I just bike 50 miles, or that's extreme, right? But saying that I'm more active, and then we have all those factors we talked about earlier, thermal strain and heat. That even 3 to 4 might not be enough. Because is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So, and I think the easy way to put that is that if you're thinking of just being a normal person, living your life day to day, having 2 to 3 of those genes is probably going to be relatively sufficient, right? As you're in a day to day, you're going to be at a good spot as far as, hey, my body's prepared. I'm normally hydrated. I'm ready to go. But with exercise or physical activity, you're going to need more. Now, how much more is going to be dependent, and there's some strategies that we could discuss about how to have some simple calculations to do that. But with exercise, you're going to need more in addition to your just daily living, and that's going to be based on the environment and your sweat rate and how much fluid you're losing based on duration and exercise.
Now, we're going to have our techno weenies out there who are going to want to calculate their sweat rate, and they're going to want to calculate this and that, and get super like scientifically specific. I mean, we have those people. But in general, I mean, conceptually, right? I mean, it is a lot for me to drink 3 to 4 of these a day. Okay. It's a challenge. It truly is a challenge. So one of the things I say to my patients and athletes and others, I just say, hey, let's look at your pee, right? And it could be completely rudimentary. I don't know. But I think for the normal person, that's something they can always rely on. It's something easy potentially for them to assess. And I happen to have some of Armstrong research in relation to what he's advocating as far as like looking at the color of your pee. Would you be in agreement with that? That's a good strategy overall?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good strategy. And I think to add on to that, I think looking at your urine color is good. I think looking at, assessing, how thirsty you are, like, oh, I perceive myself to be rather thirsty, or looking at day-to-day changes in body weight. I think those independently can be effective, in combination can be effective. But I think looking at your urine color is a good way. You wake up in the morning, you look at the urine color of your first void in the morning when you wake up. Well, if that's dark, you probably did a bad job the day before in hydrating.
That's an interesting thing you just said, because that's enlightening for me, because for the most part, I've told people, and I think I'm wrong here, don't worry about your color of your pee in the morning, because obviously you slept all night, you're essentially not hydrating throughout the night, so it's not the best indicator. I tell people by noon, by lunchtime, maybe look at that, but maybe it's too late. So I think you're probably onto something there. Is that um, maybe we shouldn't be super dark in the morning because then that indicates our hydration level from the previous days.
Yeah, because ideally, if you think about it, you're going to sleep in, let's say, ideally, you're going to sleep for 8 hours a night,
Hmm.
ideally, right? But you have 8 hours of sleep. Well, you're not consuming any fluids, so your body is concentrating your urine because it needs water as you're sleeping, right? Your body needs water.
Yeah.
So, if you wake up and that first void is pretty dark, well, you probably went to bed not in an optimal state, and your body continued to store water and because it needs it for normal functioning. So that first void, if it's dark, well, it's pretty concentrated, meaning I may not have went to bed at a good state, right? So
Right.
that may be a good thing.
So
Okay, today I'm gonna try more.
yeah, that has just been an epiphany for me. Because they don't really talk about that in literature. So if you're okay with it, why don't we look at those colors, I guess,
Mhm.
to let people know. Everyone, I'll post all this research as well as these images on the description, and you'll be able to access them. But let's take a look. I pulled this from this. This is open access. So this is based off Armstrong's work. And my understanding is what they recommend, Dr. Adams, is like these three are okay. So once we get to dark yellow, we're getting hypohydrated. And so if we wake up in the morning, like what you're saying, and particularly if it's consistent, right? If we consistently see this when we wake up in the morning and we're like a syrup, or kind of like the brown ale, like beer. I got a question about beer in a second. Then we probably didn't do a good job at hydrating. And this is just another one here. So this 1, 2, 3, we're pretty okay. That's what we're probably be shooting for. And what I've been telling my patients is, I want you here all the time. And I want you to be consistent. I never really thought about it as a predictor of how well we've been hydrating the previous days in the morning. I just kind of assumed, hey, everybody's going to wake up and they're all going to be down here in 8. That's probably bad, what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think if I guess maybe if we were to pick or to provide one strategy for individuals to make sure that you're in a good zone of hydration, would you recommend like using this chart? Is that sort of like your go? Is that for you as a researcher in hydration? Is that your go-to, or is there something else that we can give them to adequately guide them in the proper hydration?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of a couple. So I typically myself like to provide a three-pronged approach, urine color being one of them, and that
Okay.
first morning void. Another one is thirst perception. So if I'm waking up and if I'm thirsty, very similarly to the urine color. If I wake up, I'm very thirsty, I may not have done a good job the day before,
Hmm.
right? Because of the thirst perception and those mechanisms by which thirst perception increases. Those two, and I think lastly is looking at daily body weight. And I'll provide some more context here in a second, but I think those three factors can be good approaches to doing those individually. Yeah, those are decent approaches, knowing that there may be some logistical hurdles with some of those. Do I have a urine color chart, or do I know, or do I know what I'm looking at, or do I have a scale to be able to assess my weight, or do I know how to actually understand or conceptualize that? So there's some hurdles, but I think in combination, those three metrics can be good, right? If I wake up and my first void is dark and I wake up and I'm thirsty, and let's just say I wake up and I take my body weight, and just let's just say my body weight the day I wake up is more than 1% lower than the day before. Those three indicators in combination probably tell me right then and there I did a really bad job the day before. And then it's more of a reflection. Okay, what did I do yesterday that may have been out of the ordinary or may have been different? And that could have been, well, I went for a really hard bike ride and I probably didn't consume enough fluid during or after. Yeah, actually, I left my water bottle at home and I was outside for a 3-hour hike.
Mhm.
So, like, you can reflect as far as, okay, what happened yesterday that could have impacted that, right? And then making sure you're addressing that. Now, the reason that I pick those three variables One that was proposed a long time ago. I mean, I believe the first time it was proposed was in 2003 or 2005. Dr. Sam Chevront and Dr. Mike Saka proposed this kind of Venn diagram model of these three variables in a Gatorade Sports Science exchange article that they wrote, and then that was kind of reintroduced throughout time. Yeah, these are good. And if you have two of the three, okay, there's maybe you're more likely. If you have all three of these, so all three, you're thirsty, you have dark colored urine, and your body weight is off by more than 1% from the day before, you might be very likely to be underhydrated or dehydrated or hyperhydrated from the day before. And actually, so we actually took that conceptual model, and we actually did a study, and that paper is currently under review at MSSE. And what we had found actually is body weight's actually the factor with the largest variance as far as what predicts whether or not you're hydrated or not. Followed next by, I think, urine color and thirst. It's been a little bit of time since I've gone back, but body weight, the day-to-day body weight changes had the biggest weight, if you will, as far as what predicted the hydration status the next day. So I like all three. I think all three are fine is a standalone. If you're able to do them in combination, even better, I think. But then those are pretty simple things, right?
Well, I love that. Yeah, the three amigos, right?
Yeah.
We have three amigos. And it appears the most important amigo out of the group, right, of course, is the weight piece. Okay, then we mentioned the color and then thirst perception. Well, I guess maybe define that a little bit, because I think those are achievable metrics for people to do. Like, I am wake up in the morning, I got a scale right next to the shower, bathroom, whatever. Maybe they have the chart there. But maybe you can talk a little bit further about the weight piece, because when we wake up in the morning, people always want to be lighter. I want to lose weight. So how do we know? I mean, how do we know that we're losing weight, but it's good weight? It's not like water weight that we really need.
Yeah.
Frame that out for us a little bit.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think if we're looking at weight, like weight loss from a weight management perspective, that's gonna be much longer. That's gonna be a much longer timeline, longer scale, right?
Okay.
If we're looking at acute changes, right? If I go day to day or hour to hour or whatever, those changes are primarily water. Now, day to day, there might be some weight loss as overall body mass. But if I see big changes in body weight from day to day, that's most likely primarily water there. So thinking more time scale. Day to day changes are probably largely driven by water. Long-term changes across weeks and months, that's probably more body mass changes from a weight management perspective. So that's an easy way to frame it. Like day to day, think water. Longer term, weeks, months, body weight, right? But I think an easy way to kind of calculate that, because I mentioned, greater than 1%. Well, how do I calculate 1%? Well, if I start kind of keeping track of my body weight, and that may be a scale, right? And you can have a little notepad in your bathroom next to your urine color chart. Who knows, right? You can have a whole setup in your bathroom.
Right.
But say one day I'm like, say 70 kilograms, and the next day I wake up and I'm like 69 kilograms. Well, that's a 1 kilogram difference between the day before and today. So what I would do is I would just take that 1 kilogram difference, divide that by the 70 kilogram difference from the day before, and multiply by 100 to give you a percentage. And if that's greater than 1%, which I think that is, don't quote me on that, but I think that is, then it's like, I may not have done a good job the day before. I should not have lost 1 kilogram of body weight day to day, right? So that's an easy way to calculate that and you can do that daily, right? And across time, like your weight.
I'm going to calculate.
Yeah, calculate that, yeah. But across time, like your body weight should fluctuate, and it's normal to fluctuate within plus or minus 1%, because we have variability in our lives, right? Day to day. So it's normal to be plus or minus 1%. And if you do that across time, then you're going to see a consistent amount. And then you can use those day to day changes to kind of see, oh, wow, that's more than 1% or less than 1%, et cetera.
So I'm in America. I mean, I'm a research scientist as well, and I know I'm into kilograms and metrics too, but a lot of our folks here in the United States, we're still in the English sort of kind of realm, right? So I just calculated for myself, I'm roughly a 200-pound individual. I'd like to be lighter, but so if I lost 1%, essentially I'm losing 2 pounds, right? So normally I get excited about that in the morning, like, hey, I lost 2 pounds, right? But the next day, I'm back up 2 pounds, right? So from a time perspective, and I think this might be important, is if I do lose a bunch of my pounds or kilograms, can I get it back right away? I mean, like, I think that a lot of my patients and athletes, they get dehydrated and they're like, well, I drank today, I'm good. You know, can you, like, is it instantaneous? Like, okay, I'm just gonna drink a bunch of water this morning and I'm good. Like, what's the time thing? Because, you know, I, and I'm kind of picking up where you're going in that, there's time of like the day before and how well I was hydrated. And then I wake up and now one of the biggest factors, amigos in the mix is like, have I lost more than I really should? Have I stayed consistent? So I'm hearing is we need kind of a consistent weight from day to day and not drop, right? And so, but if I do drop, how easy or how difficult is it for me to get that back? And what should I expect as far as time to get that back?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it simply, like you could get it back pretty quickly, right? So say I'm gonna go back to the metric system because it just makes it easier, right? Let's
Sure.
just say I'm 1 kilogram down from the day before. Well,
Mhm.
1 kilogram, we can say that's pretty equivalent to 1 liter.
Okay.
Plus or yeah.
So that's nice. I like that.
Yeah,
1 kilogram, 1 liter.
which is why the metric system's nice in most cases where
Yeah. Yeah.
you think about pounds, yeah, I'd have to actually calculate that.
Right.
So if I'm 1 kilogram down from the
Mhm.
day, well, I can drink 1 liter right away. Like I can just slam 1 liter of fluid
Okay.
and then I can replace it because now there's that 1 liter of fluid that's now in my body. So now I'm 1 liter heavier or one
Mhm.
kilogram heavier. Well, what's going to happen if I slam it right away? Well, your kidneys are going to filter all of that water. Your kidneys filter about 180 liters of water a day going through that. So your kidneys are going to filter that water and your kidneys are going to excrete anything that's unneeded at that time, right?
Okay.
If I slam a whole bunch of water right away, it'll get absorbed to go through my kidneys. But if my body does not need it right then and there, it's waste. It's going to leave, right? So now, if I slam 1 liter of fluid, probably within 20 or 30 minutes, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom pretty bad. And I'm going to go and I'm going to urinate and I'm probably going to lose a couple hundred milliliters. So that liter that I lost, I'm going to pee it out, right? So all that to say is, I think again, it kind of depends, right? It depends on what that loss is. It depends on what you have on the schedule for the day. It depends on a number of things. Ideally, you want to replace that. My recommendation would be if I'm say again 1 kilogram down or 1 liter down, well, I'm gonna be intentional and make sure that throughout that day I want to make sure I just consume an extra liter.
Instead of that 3 or 4 liters, I'm going to go 5 liters
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
as a male. As a male.
yeah, depending. Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna be intentional. I'm gonna make sure I consume an extra liter. Now that could be just straight up fluid. That could be or water content in food. So it depends. So, but I'm gonna make
Mhm.
an intentional effort to consume the extra liter throughout the entire day. Now spacing it out and consuming that in a time frame that you would normally be consuming fluids or trying to find times between that,
Mhm.
it's spaced out enough where your body's gonna have time to absorb it and to utilize it. And you're gonna have to urinate throughout the day, so it's going to account for some of those things as
Yeah.
well. You have some time to do that. Now, the difference I think would be if you're in a situation where you do need to replace it more quickly. Say you're an athlete and say you're a tennis athlete, you have a match at say 8 a.m. and say it's 3 hour match, and then you have another match at 4 p.m. So you have like 5 hours. Well,
Mhm.
if I'm down a bunch of body weight after my first match, which is very likely depending on the environment and everything else, well, I better replace everything before my next match. I want to be optimal, right? Well, now the strategy changes a little bit. Where now it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna need to consume more than what I lost because I'm gonna pee, so I'm gonna lose some of that. Instead of just equaling that, well, I'm gonna probably drink 150% of my losses.
Mhm.
I'm gonna probably drink some fluids that have more density, so carbohydrates and proteins and things, because that's more likely to stay in my body longer to allow my body to absorb it more efficiently, and eat it with foods. And that way, 5 hours from then, I'm in a pretty good spot, right? So the timing does come back to play depending on what it is. Normal day to day, you have the day, but if in situations such as being an athlete, Yeah, I'm going to be more intentional, and I may need to drink a lot more in a short period of time. But then it's like,
Mhm.
okay, what do I drink? How do I prepare? In everything like that. So timing is a big factor, and I think there's a lot of nuances as far as how to best approach that. To be, I guess, one, efficient, but two, make sure that you're optimizing what your body is trying to do.
Well, I'm going to make a jump here too. And I don't think we have any research on this yet, but I'm wondering, you know, if I lose a lot. So for those folks out there, I had to look it up. 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2.05 pounds, right? It's really close, but regardless of that, let's say I lose 4 pounds or I lose 2 kilograms. I just had this sort of conceptual thing in my head, like I've probably lost more electrolytes in that process. So the more like pounds I'm down, maybe I lost more electrolytes. And so therefore, yes, there's the water, but maybe I need more electrolytes. I don't know if we yet have something like a correlational chart or a corollary of like, how do I determine now how much electrolytes have I lost? Right. And does it matter? I mean, or do I just like supplement with a whole bunch of electrolytes along with my water, knowing that, oh, I've gone past a kilogram, I've gone past a liter. Did we have anything to guide us on that at this point?
I mean, there's actually decent literature to look at that more acute time frame. So thinking of your athletic event, right? You're a
Hmm.
tennis player, you finish a match, you have another match in 5 hours, right?
Hmm.
So there is decent literature to suggest that consuming a beverage that has higher molecular weight, higher concentration. So let's just say it's a carbohydrate electrolyte beverage, a sports drink. Well, that's extra energy density. So since it's a greater concentration, it's going to have a greater likelihood of being retained longer in our body or more retained in our body, right? So
It's gonna allow us to hold on to that water.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that energy density is going to be helpful because it's going to, one, slow, at least a little bit, slow your gastric emptying rate. So your stomach's gonna hold on to that fluid a little bit longer, right? And it's also going to increase the absorption rate, the amount of fluid that's being absorbed into your into your circulation. So yeah, there is good literature to suggest that, yeah, having a beverage that is higher energy density
Hmm.
is going to be helpful, right? And that's why some people, there's some people that are big proponents of, I'm going to finish a hard workout, I'm going to drink a big chocolate milk. Well, it's not bad because one is pretty dense, right? There's proteins, there's
Hmm.
fat, there's carbohydrates to help replenish some of those stores, but there's also water in that. That in combination is going to be helpful because it's going to stay in my body longer. It's going to help be absorbed a lot
Right.
more, and hopefully retain more fluid than having to go in and urinate it out. So, there is literature to suggest we, on a short time scale, having fluid, consuming fluid that's more energy dense can be helpful. Now, the caveat to that is, what if I only have plain water? Well, if you have plain water, but say you have like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, well, it's all going in the same place. It's going to your stomach, right?
Hmm.
So now I have a denser food that has, say, carbohydrates and proteins and fats and water. It's all going to be mixed together and have the same effect. So even if you don't have a very energy dense liquid beverage,
Hmm.
being strategic in general is helpful, right? Okay, well,
Right.
just finished a hard workout. I need to replace fluids. I have another, say, my next match. If I'm a tennis player, my next match is in 5 hours. I need to eat. Okay, well, I'm gonna have my between match meal, my fluid, and that in combination is also going to be effective, right? It's all about slowing the gastric emptying rate and optimizing the absorption rate of fluids into your circulation.
So maybe you can comment on that because I've heard all kinds of different, well, some facts, but also some theories about how do we get the most out of our water and electrolyte absorption, utilization? How do we prevent, I guess, from peeing it all out, right? So I've heard that like it might be beneficial to take in a certain temperature of fluid or at a certain time or with a certain mix of different things, like I mean, a lot of the electrolyte drinks are full of sugar. I don't know that's like intentional or great or whatever. So can you comment on that? Is there a better temperature to like be drinking? Like should it be ice cold? Should it be like warm? Should it be tepid? I mean, is there validity to that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'll reference those tuning in. to there is a great comprehensive physiology review paper published by Dr. Lindsay Baker. And the review paper is really focused on the optimal hydration beverage.
Okay.
And in there, they talk about everything, which is great. It's an amazing. I always reference that paper because it's just filled with so much knowledge. But then they talk about, okay, well, if I want to design an optimal beverage to consume, what do I need to think about? Well, I need to think about palatability. Does it taste good, right?
Mm.
I need to think about temperature. I need to think about just the physiological effects within the body, right? Thinking of absorption rates, gastric emptying rates, thinking about like the pH, because that's going to change some of that. So there's a whole host of things that are there that kind of help guide as far as what would be an optimal hydration beverage, right? So to your point about temperature, that's one of them. Like if it's super ice cold, most people aren't going to want to drink something that's super ice cold. Again, conversely, most people aren't going to want to drink something that's very warm at all. So is there an optimal temperature? Yeah, there is. And I think if I remember correctly, it's around like the 50-degree Fahrenheit range. Like that's an optimal temperature. Maybe a little cooler, and then there's probably some individual preferences there. In that same paper, they talk about optimizing, palatability and your absorption rates and your gastric emptying rates. And it's like, okay, well, if we add in some density, energy density, right? Sugars, electrolytes, etc. How can we optimize what all those things are? And they provide some recommendations as far as types of sugar to include in that beverage that's going to increase the osmolality of the concentration of that beverage to make sure it empties the stomach quickly, but it gets absorbed into circulation quickly in the intestines. So, like I said, this paper does a really phenomenal job of providing some insight. So I think going back to your question, right?
Yeah.
Making sure the beverage is cool, make sure that it tastes good, make sure that if anything is added to it, like thinking of like your sugars and your carbohydrates, if you will, and your electrolytes, make sure that it's going to be at a concentration that is going to optimize the speed at which it leaves the stomach and increase the speed at which it leaves or it gets absorbed into the circulation. Like I said, that I would reference that paper because it does a great job in providing some insights.
Again, maybe just I can recap this for us. Not too cold, not too hot. Maybe it's 50 degrees or so, and we'll have to kind of figure what that, for most people are like, well, what is 50 degrees, like well, we go for Celsius too. But then, it might have to taste good, but what's really interesting about the taste piece, right? Obviously taste is an individual preference, right? I've had some of my athletes and patients tell me like, I don't like the sports drinks, because they're too syrupy for me, right? They're just, and same with some of the electrolyte supplements out there. It's like too heavy. It's like it's too salty. It's too syrupy. And so that's what I like about Elite because there's no taste, right? Which is both can be a positive and a negative for some people, but it's not going to taste syrupy, right? Too heavy. But I do agree that for many individuals, and this is one of the hydration hacks, it's got to be palatable. It's got to kind of like ring to you, like, hey, I want to drink this, right? I don't want it to be torture. Well, so and then that other piece about maybe we should be adding in a little bit of carbohydrate, possibly some type of sugar to help with the metabolism and absorption, and then finally is what you were saying before is about the sort of overall how much, right? How much should we be taking in? And from a day-to-day perspective, I know that's sort of undetermined in relation to electrolytes and fluid and so forth. But in athletics, in sports, how much do we take in? I go back to the three amigos, like what you said before. Like, am I losing weight, right? On a day-to-day basis where, I'm obviously losing too much. Am I thirsty? Is another one, right? And then is my urine color really dark? So I'm definitely going to put up all this research. People can decide, use it as they wish. I think probably, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, Dr. Adams, but the majority of the population, I mean, I think even our athletes, right? They're like, oh, I got a monster. I'm good. You know, not for most people, right? Now, our serious individuals who really want to optimize their well-being in life and health on a daily basis, as well as really maximize their athletic performance, are really going to probably pay attention to the details and really start to get down to the details. And we'll provide some of those details for you. However, maybe we can just do a lightning round real quick because I do have questions from my athletes here at Elevated as well as our patients, and I think they're interesting questions, right? So we treat a lot of pro snowboarders here being in Utah and skiers. They're like, well, it's cold, Tim. I don't really need that much fluid. I mean, these are professional athletes, right? And they're telling me, it's cold out. I mean, I'm not sweating. I mean, I drink in the morning. I'll go board for, I don't know, 6, 8 hours. Sometimes I even skin up a mountain, come down. I'm good. Right? So I talked about thermal strain, but do we need to drink when it's cold out, when we're not really sweating? And
Yeah.
maybe why? I mean, but why would that be the case?
Yeah. I mean, I think we do. And I think I would call that a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
Like we sweat through the day. Me sitting here right now, I'm sweating, right? My body has to maintain thermal balance, right? So across the day, like I am going to sweat because my body needs to make sure that my body temperatures maintain this within this finite limit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I may be sweating. Now, if I'm going to be on the slope and snowboarding, and I'm going to be wearing clothes to kind of help me keep my skin safe, right? Well, you're probably going to be sweating. You may not perceive that because it's cold out, right? And typically, I mean, that may not be a perception that you're going to feel right away. Particularly, and also thinking of like being in Utah or here in Colorado, for example, it's more dry out, right?
Right.
I'm not going to feel the sweat on my skin necessarily because it's being evaporated efficiently. There's not water moisture in the air from humidity. I may perceive, oh, it's cold out. I don't need to drink anything. Well, your body's probably in a setting, in a situation where that sweat or that you're not perceiving it because it's just being efficiently removed from the body before you feel that. So you most likely do need to consume fluids. When I say the volume needs to be the same as if you're out exercising in 105-degree temperature, oh, probably not, right? But you still need to be cognizant of consuming fluid throughout the day. Going back to what we discussed before, like you still need to meet your daily intake recommendations
Mm-hmm.
for long-term health. So that may be sufficient there to help replace most of it. But again, that's going to depend on the individual.
Okay. Next question. Great. Thank you. I don't want to pee all the time, Dr. Adams. You're telling me to drink more. I don't want to pee all the time. Does it ever stop? Does my body ever stop peeing so much as I'm drinking more, right? Because for some individuals, it's like super inconvenient to like, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, like if I'm drinking four, and I switched over to my lactate, right? I've gone from this to this, right? So, I drink four of these. Is it normal that I'm peeing all the time? Or is it because I'm just like flushing everything out because I don't have enough electrolytes? So what do we say to those people who are like, well, I'm not gonna drink that much because I just don't want to pee all the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have an answer for that. I think partly partly I think goes down to like timing, right? If I consume a whole lot of fluid at a short period of time,
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to pee pretty quickly thereafter because my body won't need it.
Okay.
You space out across the day. Does that change the number of voids that you're having in a day? Maybe. I don't have the answer for that. So I'm not sure. That's a great question.
Well, let me, and I don't know about the sort of regulation piece either. I'll comment on my personal experience. As gearing up for this podcast the last several months, I was like, man, I got to start drinking more. I started reading the literature, and I'm like, whoa, I'm not drinking enough. So I did notice when I first started that I definitely had to go to the bathroom more. I had to pee more, right? But what's interesting over this last month or so, as I've stayed consistent, I've noticed I don't have to pee as much. I don't have to avoid as much. But what's interesting, another patient of mine asked the question, well, if I drink more water, I just seem more thirsty. And I didn't really understand that. Like, because she says, why is it when I drink more water, I'm more thirsty and she craves more water.
Hmm.
Well, I didn't know about that. I thought, well, maybe it has something to do with the regulation of that ABP. I wasn't quite sure, or that it's just a signal to our body, like you're a low water consumer, and now that you're drinking water, your body's going like, "Hey, I like this."
Hmm.
Thoughts on that?
I mean, that's another good question that I don't think I have a firm answer on. But I mean, I like your the last place like where you're saying is, maybe your body is like, oh, my body it likes this water, right? So
Mhm.
maybe the sensitivity of that thirst perception may be increased a little bit because now it's in a spot where, hey, my body likes this, it needs this. Uh, Now, do I know of any literature that has really fully tested that? Not off the top of my head. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I think for sure that it's something that is intrigued or it piqued my interest a little bit because that could very well be like how I
Yeah.
guess the question there would be, okay, can you alter the perception of thirst or change the sensitivity which the onset of thirst is I guess perceived or experienced based on fluid intake or change in fluid intake? Like, I mean, it'd be a good question to test.
Yeah. Well, it brings to that the three factors that you had
Mhm.
mentioned that are really important to monitor, which is that thirst perception, right? So if I'm thirsty, it's likely telling me, coupled with the other two factors you mentioned, weight reduction and obviously urine color, like I need to drink more. And so maybe it's just an early indicator, like what we've talked about, like, hey, my body likes this. It's wanting more. And then I would imagine there probably gets to a certain point where that thirst perception starts to balance out because our body now is now at equilibrium because, basically it's saying to us, like, hey, you're not there yet. You're not there yet. And eventually, as we be more consistent, we'll get there. It'll be really interesting, and it'll be really interesting research study for graduate assistant, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So another probably one of the most important questions. Yeah, and this maybe we're in Utah. We're not necessarily considered like a state that promotes alcohol consumption, but the reality is that most individuals, adults, do consume alcohol. Okay, and I'll reveal, I guess, one of my nasty little kind of traditions and habits, So I used to go out with my buddies. We used to mountain bike, 4 6 hours, whatever, it'd be crazy. Um, and after those long rides, I always had this buddy of mine. He had a cooler in the back of his truck. Okay. And he would bring two things, right? We would have a beer after a ride and a thing of peanuts, right? And he was adamant. He's like, this is the best rehydration strategy, right? So then I was thinking the other day because I didn't do the peanuts. One of my buddies and we had a beer. We had been consuming water and electrolytes all throughout our ride. Gone for several hours. But afterwards, we had a beverage, and I'm just curious, like how detrimental is that? I mean, is it really, really super bad to because you see it at events too, like these large events, whatever they might be, Tough Mudder or whatever, and they'll have like a beer can at the place, and that's like the hydration like station, comments on that, I mean, good, bad, indifference, like don't worry about it. Are we hurting ourselves doing that? Because my wife was like, you shouldn't be doing that, that's terrible for you. And I'm like, but it tastes good.
I mean, you know, I've thinking of my personal experiences of running various marathons, half marathons, etc. Like, yeah, that after race beverage, it tastes good, right?
Yeah.
Um, I guess to answer your question, as far as is that good, is it bad, is it indifferent? I don't know.
Another study, another really
Yeah,
cool research study.
I don't know. I mean, see, if it's a beer, right? Beer has water in it, so there's water, there's other nutrients in there, right?
But it's a diuretic too, right?
It's a diet, yeah, because it's going to inhibit secretion of
Uh-huh.
ABP, right? Now, whether or not one beer is going to do that or how much is going to do that, I don't know. There may be literature. I've never studied that piece of it. So like, I think in the case example, I'm gonna go out for a hard mountain bike ride, then after I'm done, I'm gonna have a single beer. Do I think that's gonna have a detrimental effect? Probably not. Is it gonna have a helpful effect? Who knows?
Probably not.
Who knows? Right? It's like somewhere in the middle, right? Somewhere in the middle.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So for listeners out there, we do not have a beer sponsor as an electrolyte or hydration product, but I would agree. I would think that obviously, we go back to this three primary factors, or there's three kind of strategies, weight, urine color, and thirst, that, if individuals are consuming alcohol after their particular event, ride, athletic endeavor, and they see those things, starting to be in a negative zone, then I would probably recommend, like, pull back on that. So go with the nutrient dense electrolyte beverage, milk. Maybe that's your first beverage, not the beer. I mean, that seems like a realistic strategy, but the jury's out because we don't have research on that. So for you graduate students out there, that'd be a fun study, right? I'm sure you get sponsored by some beer company, and you could say, okay, so, wouldn't it be interesting to find? I'm just saying, this is initial hypothesis. Wouldn't it be interesting to find, like, well, hey, if you drink a beer, it's actually better. It's like the best recovery drink ever. And of course, we can't do that for underage, of course, but for adults, right? Wouldn't that be funny? Because beer has sugar in it. We talked about carbohydrates. It has water, right? And so, and then if you get one that's like a fruity thing, maybe you do have some little electrolytes in there. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm actually reminded there was a study published a long time ago now. The purpose was to develop a beverage hydration index of various types of fluids, and meaning it was really just a ratio of really urine output across time. If the ratio is greater than 1, meaning you had less urine output than compared to just drinking distilled water than everything. They did test beer in that study. I just forget what the beverage hydration index was. Yeah, so I've done it. So there's probably a little bit of like research that's been published to like say how much fluid retention capacity is there in beer. Now, granted, this particular study, they consumed a liter of fluids and then looked at urine output across 4 hours. So there's no exercise involved. It's just looking at that. But I forget what the data were on that. But they did test a longer in that. But I want to say that was published a long. Ron Mon conducted that study. But yeah, interesting piece there. So, but to your point, I mean, it would be interesting to kind of explore. I think there's still a lot yet to explore in general as it relates to hydration, whether it be different types of beverages and optimal strategies and all that. So,
well, as we wrap up today, is there anything else that you would like to give folks as they sort of embark on improving their overall health and performance through many of the hydration sort of strategies, hacks, things we've talked about? Maybe things that have been kind of on your mind about what individuals should pursue or do, and maybe we'll wrap up with your final comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think probably the simple take home is, I think we all need to do a better job of drinking more water. I think that's going to come in different ways, right? That could be just plain water. That could be integrating or incorporating more water dense foods in our diets. That could be a combination thereof. I think in general, I think we just need to do a better job of drinking more water in our daily life, knowing the literature that exists to show how bad as humans we are typically at consuming water. So there's always room for improvement. But yeah, I mean, it's probably my simple take home. And then going back to what we talked, you mentioned the three amigos. So you coined it the three amigos, using simple strategies such as that to really reflect on, hey, I did a pretty good job yesterday, or maybe not. So I'm going to make more of an effort today, and using those metrics to really reflect upon yourself and your own behaviors to then have more sustained or healthy behaviors long term.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Adams, for sharing your expertise and the research and things you're working on and of course your life and clinical experience with our listeners. We appreciate you sharing those with the In with Dr. Tim and hope that we can maybe even expound on this in the future, particularly if we get that beer study. Right? Yeah. But until then,
Let's find a good sponsor to do it.
there we go. We'll find one. Until then, we look forward to seeing you again and looking forward to more of your research as it comes online. And please share that with us and our listeners. And listeners, if you want to reach out to Dr. Adams, we'll leave. I guess maybe let me ask you, Dr. Adams, what's the best way for our listeners to reach you in this day and age?
Yeah. I mean, if you're Twitter or X user, you can find me at William_M_Adams. You can find me pretty quite simply there. I'm on LinkedIn. So easy to find me. Email wise, pretty simple. You can email me at info at williamadamsphd.com. That goes right. Yeah. So those are 3 ways to reach out to me. And if you can't find me, then I'm not sure.
They're probably not on the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks so much. I will be posting on Dr. Adams' contact information, his full bio, and so forth on this particular podcast. But we again appreciate your time and your expertise, and here's to hydrating.
Awesome. Thank you again for the invitation. And
Sure. Just want to say a loud shout out and thank you to our podcast sponsor today, and that is Elite Electrolytes. And so Elite Electrolytes, I came across them by complete accident. One of our patients here at Elevated Performance and Rehabilitation actually is part of the company. And we started to have a chit chat about electrolytes. And I really hadn't thought about like supplementing my electrolytes, not only throughout the day, but also during my athletic pursuits. And so I've been doing the Elite Electrolyte supplementation for about a couple months now. I can say I've noticed a very significant difference, not only in my daily life, but my athletic performance. I'm recovering better. I have more energy. I feel overall really just better. And so what's really cool about this product, and it comes in various forms, like they have the little bottles you can just cup into, your water. They have also, what's really cool, trace mineral clumps that you can put in. I do that daily now. And whatever form you decide to take, what's really cool about their product is it's non-GMO, completely clean, mined from the northern Great Salt Lake here in Utah, super clean, super lab tested. And it's not that heavy syrup taste, right? So I'm able to put it in my water and as I'm working out, actually, you spray a little on you, you're not getting all sticky. That's how I love that. And at the same time, I'm ensuring that I'm getting adequate electrolytes as I lose them. As Dr. Will Adams and I talked, the more water we lose, we're likely losing a lot of electrolytes. And if our diet's a little deficient, then we likely need them. So I would encourage you to check out Elite Electrolytes, and we're going to provide you a discount. And so, you're ready to feel the difference? I think you will, if you visit Elite. So visit elite.com and learn more about how to order your supply of Elite electrolytes. And then for our listeners, we have a special offer for you today. Use the discount code Dr. Tim 25 to get 25% off on your first order. That's Dr. Tim 25 for 25% off your first order. So coupon code Dr. Tim 25, and then we'll provide you all the links and all the information about Elite electrolytes. We love them, and we hope that you do too. And thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to hit your notification bell. There's more coming. We're back on the train, and we're going to bring you some amazing speakers and some amazing content in our future episodes. Take care, and you have a very elevated day.